Finland is keeping a close eye on Putin, and now it's preparing for a full-scale war against Russia. Finland just did something shocking to prepare for that fight, as it's now delivering the message to Putin that it will be ready if Russia's leader wants war. It all starts with a fence. For the last few years, Finland has been hard at work on the construction of a 124-mile fence along the eastern border that it shares with Russia. That border has been a potential powder keg for several years, leading to Finland closing it entirely in 2024. For now, May 21st brought with it the news that Finland has taken a massive step toward getting its fence up and running. The Finnish border guard has announced that it has completed the first 22 miles of construction, with work to continue on the rest of the fence throughout 2025. This isn't any old fence. According to Euractiv, each segment of Finland's giant fence consists of 11.4-foot-high solid metal railings that are topped by a 3.2-foot-high roll of barbed wire. Adding to these defenses are cameras used to detect movement along the border, sensors that serve the same purpose, and both lights and loudspeakers Finland can use to demonstrate to any who try to cross that it sees them and is prepared to react. You may be hearing this and thinking that this fence might not be enough to stop Russia in the case of a full-blown war. You'd likely be right. However, that isn't the fence's purpose. Rather than keeping the Russians out, at least for now, the fence is being built as part of Finland's efforts to secure its borders against a wave of migrants it believes Russia has been sending its way since at least 2023. That's according to Southeast Finland Border Guard District Deputy Commander Antti Virta, who said in May that the main purpose of the fence is to control a large mass of people if they are trying to enter from Russia to Finland. Those people are migrants today. Perhaps tomorrow the fence will help Finland to stop Russian infantry in their tracks if they try to cross the border. Finland's head of security operations, Samuel Siljanen, reinforces Virta's comments. The border barrier is absolutely necessary to maintain border security, he claims. From the border guard's perspective, it improves our ability to perform border surveillance, to act if there's some kind of disruption at the border or a border incident. In other words, Finland sees what Russia is trying to pull at its border. Now it's ready to respond. Finland believes that it will finish construction on the full fence by the end of 2026, which it hopes gives it enough time to be ready for Russia if it tries to pull anything after the Ukraine war. But by now, we know what you're thinking. The massive fence is very impressive, but is it really enough to show us that Finland is preparing for a war with Russia? Who said that the fence was the only thing Finland was doing to get ready for that fight? Ever since Putin invaded Ukraine, the attitude toward Russia's leader has grown increasingly hostile, to the point where even the average Finnish person is preparing for war. We saw this as early as March 1st, 2022, around a week after Putin's forces first entered Ukraine. On that date, YLE published a report noting that there had been a massive uptick in the number of people registering for Finland's National Defence Training Association, or MPK, emergency preparedness courses and military training sessions. Typically, around 150 people would have signed up for one of these courses by March, says YLE. But by the beginning of March 2022, that number had more than quadrupled to around 700, with the rate of sign-ups being on the verge of accelerating from there. These courses are offered primarily to women, and an explanation for the higher number of participants was offered by Sissi Moberg. An entrepreneur, she says that she found herself sourcing the internet in search of such courses mere hours after news emerged of Putin's full-scale invasion. I felt very sad for the Ukrainians, and then started to worry about Finland and thinking what could I do about this, Moberg told Reuters in June 2022. It took only a couple of weeks for Moberg to sign up for a course designed to teach her how to use a gun and move effectively on a battlefield. Moberg was just one of many who signed up for such courses. Finland's NASTA's communications and organization manager Suvi Aksela says, "Right after the war broke out, our phones started ringing and emails were flying in, and of course the demand for training went up. Fast forward to October 2024, and this emerging Finnish desire to get ready for a fight is still in full swing. MPK now runs around 3,000 voluntary courses annually, designed to show people how to shoot and conduct other military actions so they're ready for whatever comes, whether they're part of Finland's military or not. The courses, which come with a tiny enrollment fee typically in the $17 region, all sell out in hours according to Monocle. Right now, those courses are helping to train 70,000 participants annually. Again, most of them women, as Finnish men go through military training already, on a budget of just $9.1 million. This may not seem like a big deal to many. However, it showcases the tide of public opinion in Finland is remarkably anti-Russia today, and has been ever since Putin invaded Ukraine. Even the average Finnish citizen wants to be ready to fight for the simple reason that they believe a war is coming. That's a subtle signal to Putin. If he has designs on Finland, he's going to have to fight hard to get it. Far less subtle are the other things Finland is doing to prepare for an all-out war with Russia. Beyond the border fence and so many of its citizens training for a fight, Finland has also broken with decades of neutrality to do something Putin never believed it would do. join NATO. In truth, Finland joined NATO a long time ago, bringing the group's membership up to 31 states back in April 2023. However, it's what that decision represents and what Finland has done since becoming a NATO member that shows that it's preparing for a war with Russia. In terms of what the choice represents, it ends decades of Finnish military neutrality that started with the end of World War II and had seen the country try to maintain diplomatic relations with Russia that were as strong as those it shared with the rest of Europe. It's representative of the fact that many in Finland, from the country's leadership through to its people, are now pondering the simple question of whether what's happening to Ukraine could happen to them. Joining NATO also delivered security guarantees to Finland that it hadn't previously enjoyed. Chief among them is Article 5 of the NATO Charter, which states that any attack on any single member nation is considered an attack on all of them. Under Article 5, NATO members are essentially duty-bound to come to the aid of any member who faces an attack on its own soil. We saw Article 5 in action in the wake of September 11, 2001 and the terrorist attacks on the United States, and it's something from which Finland would benefit if Russia ever invades. An attack on Finland is an attack on NATO. That alone could be enough to discourage Putin from following through on his expansionist ambitions. Also interesting is what joining NATO means in terms of the specific form of neutrality Finland previously followed. That neutrality came as a result of a 1948 friendship agreement it signed with the Soviet Union after World War II. At the time, the agreement was seen as a pragmatic way to secure Finland's future, as we'll discuss later. However, it also means that Finnish neutrality was always tied to Russia. The friendship agreement saw each side agree that it would show no hostility toward the other. So you could see Finland's decision to join NATO as a final rejection of this agreement, after Finland initially chose to end the agreement when the Soviet Union dissolved. Then there's what Finland did during the first year as a NATO member, which also shows us how seriously it's taking its emerging Russian problem. According to the Wilson Center, Finland had a banner first year that saw it repeatedly respond to Chinese and Russian-owned Shadow Fleet vessels acting suspiciously in its own and Baltic waters. The country also voted in a new prime minister soon after joining NATO and had committed $2.85 billion across 22 aid packages to Ukraine by April 2024. That figure is now closer to $3.1 billion, demonstrating that Finland is willing to use its NATO membership to showcase its support for Putin's enemy. Finland, along with Sweden and Norway, has also already hosted one of NATO's Steadfast Defender military drills, which saw 20,000 NATO troops descend on the three countries in what was dubbed NATO's largest military exercise in decades. Finland is also taking part in NATO's Baltic Air Policing mission, and its Air Force led the Arctic Challenge 2023 exercise that involved 150 aircraft. All of this points to a country that isn't satisfied with being a NATO passenger. It's a participant, one that's keen to lead the charge to ensure NATO is as ready for current and future Russian aggression as it can possibly be. Speaking of getting ready for Russia, there's one last thing that Finland is doing that shocks Putin and his cronies. It's spending big on defense. When the country joined NATO, it started by hitting the 2% of gross domestic product or GDP spending that NATO recommends for all its members. That immediately put it ahead of many of its new allies in terms of proportional spending. However, that rise to 2% was accompanied by a promise to hit 2.3% of GDP spending in 2024. Finland kept that promise, and it isn't going to stop there. At the end of 2024, Defense News published a report noting that Finland plans to raise its defense spending constantly over the next 7 years. In 2025, it will pour $6.8 billion into its military. By 2032, it intends for that figure to be $11.5 billion, which amounts to 3.3% of the country's current GDP and puts it well ahead of NATO's spending target. It also plans to hit 3% of GDP spending within the next 4 years, says Breaking Defense, a decision that was explained by Finland's defense minister Antti Häkkänen back in April. He says this increased spending will strengthen Finland's defense even further, while adding that it sets the stage to launch the modernization of the army and the strengthening of other defense capabilities based on a threat-informed basis. Translation: Finland knows what Putin is planning and it's doing everything it can to be ready. That's why Russia's leader is so shocked by everything his neighbor is doing. For decades, Putin likely saw Finland as a weak link in Europe that he could manipulate, control, and when the time came for it, invade. Now he's facing up to a country that's spending more than ever on its military, is a NATO member, and has a citizenship that is so anti-Russia that civilians are actively training to fight. The completion of a large portion of a massive fence designed to keep Russia at bay is only the latest in a string of things Finland has been doing to prepare for a full-scale war with Russia. All of which brings us to a simple question: why is Finland doing all of this? We'll start the answer with the immediate reason Finland gave for building its fence: the migrant issue. That started soon after Finland joined NATO. In response to that decision, Russia threatened action. However, it didn't launch an invasion. Instead, it began a hybrid warfare campaign against Finland that resulted in a sudden surge of asylum seekers attempting to enter the country via the border Finland shares with Russia. According to AP News, around 900 migrants sought asylum in Finland between August and November of 2023, with 800 of those migrants arriving in November alone. These migrants came from countries including Syria, Somalia, Iraq, Yemen, and Afghanistan, with all traveling through Russia to get to Finland's border. Russia also purposefully didn't check the documents these migrants had, meaning most arrived without any form of identification or permission to even enter Finland. Finland knew exactly what Russia was up to from the start. The country's foreign minister, Elina Valtonen, told AP News, "We have proof showing that, unlike before, not only Russian border authorities are letting people without proper documentation to the Finnish border, but they are also actively helping them to the border zone. Make no mistake, this is an act of war by Russia." But rather than invading Finland with its own soldiers, Russia is sending hordes of undocumented migrants to wreak havoc both at the Finnish border and, ideally for Putin, inside Finland itself. Instability is Russia's goal. The more it forces Finland to deal with this growing migration problem, the less time and resources the country can spend to prepare itself for the more direct and growing Russian threat. Of course, the Kremlin denies any involvement in Finland's migration crisis, but it isn't coincidental that the crisis has only grown larger since the initial 2023 influx. By February 2024, Russia had sent 1,300 asylum seekers Finland's way, leading to the country making the controversial decision to close its eastern border and start building a fence. Reuters also revealed another piece of the puzzle that practically confirms Russian involvement. Before August 2023, Finland averaged about 1 migrant per day arriving at its eastern border. In November 2023 alone, the 800 who arrived constituted 26.6 people per day, a dramatic increase that has no explanation other than a concerted hybrid warfare campaign ordered by Putin. Of course, destabilization is only part of the plan. On the direct military front, Russia is making a lot of moves near the eastern border that further explain why Finland's massive fence is needed and why the country is preparing for a fight. As The Guardian points out, satellite photos first published by the New York Times appear to show that Russia is massively expanding its military presence close to the very border where Finland is erecting its fence. That presence includes rows upon rows of tents, an increased number of military vehicles, renovations to fighter jet shelters that were already at the border, and even the construction of what appears to be a new helicopter base. The head of Finland's defense forces, Major General Sami Nurmi, explains exactly what Russia is doing. They are changing structures and we are seeing moderate preparations when it comes to building infrastructure close to our borders, Nurmi says. Meaning that they will, once the war in Ukraine hopefully ends, start to bring the forces that have been fighting in Ukraine, especially land forces. In other words, Putin is preparing for the future. He's building up bases close to the Finnish border now so that he can send thousands, perhaps even tens of thousands of Russian soldiers to those bases to serve as a constant threat to Finland. They are doing it in phases, Nurmi adds. I would say it's still moderate numbers. It's not big construction, but in certain places building new infrastructure and preparing, bringing new equipment in. While Nurmi is quick to stress that all of these border activities represent no immediate threat to Finland, it's not what happens immediately that's the problem. It's what happens after Ukraine. Putin has a clear purpose behind this border buildup, and it's not to make Finland feel safe. Finally, we also have to consider the context behind the relationship between Russia and Finland as another reason why the Finns are now working so hard to prepare. Reuters provided a useful crib notes version of the two countries' histories soon after Putin invaded Ukraine. It says that Russian Tsars repeatedly tried to invade the territory that would become Finland during the 17th and 18th centuries, when that territory was owned by Sweden. Eventually, Sweden lost Finland to Russia in 1809, with Russia turning Finland into the Grand Duchy of Finland, which was an autonomous territory that was part of the Russian Federation. For about a century, Finland was under Russia's control. However, the country took advantage of the chaos that erupted during the Russian Revolution, which eventually led to the formation of the Soviet Union by declaring its independence in 1917. Russia respected that independence, at least until World War II came along. Then, the Soviet Union signed a secret non-aggression pact with Nazi Germany that would have placed Finland, along with the Baltic states of Latvia and Estonia, under Soviet control once the war ended. Of course, we know that pact amounted to nothing as Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union ended up fighting against one another. Still, the fact that such a treaty was signed in the first place signaled that the Soviet Union wanted to get its hands on Finland. It tried to do just that in 1939 when Finland successfully fought off an initial Soviet invasion that became known as the Winter War. However, Finland received no help from its Western allies to keep Russia at bay, leading to it allying itself with Germany to fight the Soviets between 1941 and 1944. Finally, peace was achieved with the Moscow Armistice in 1944, which saw Russia claim 10% of Finland's territory. The previously mentioned friendship agreement followed from there, and Finland engaged in decades of neutrality designed to prevent Russia from invading again. The point of this history lesson is simple. Finland knows that Putin likes to use the past to justify his Ukraine invasion. Russia's leader could easily do the same again. Finland has been under Russia's control before and was a target for the Soviet Union that Putin seems so intent on replicating in the modern day. This history, if nothing else, shows us that Finland has never been truly safe from Russia's aggression. Now it faces a greater threat than it has for decades. Is Finland ready to deal with that threat? Not yet, but it's getting there. Pub Affairs Brussels notes that Finland has always maintained a substantial military, despite being a nation of only 5.5 million people. That military includes up to 22,800 active service personnel, though that hides Finland's true strength. Every man in the country is required to undergo military training, giving Finland a true wartime strength of 280,000 soldiers, with a further 900,000 in reserve, the publication says. Combine that with everything we've highlighted in this video, and it's clear that Finland is preparing for a fight. In truth, it has been for years. There will be no other reason to force every one of its men to engage in military training. Now that preparation is starting to bear fruit, combined with stronger border defenses, more investment, and most importantly of all, Finland's NATO membership, the country is countering Putin's threat with a substantial one of its own. The question now is, will all of those preparations lead to a full-blown war with Russia? Let us know your thoughts about the answer in the comments section below, along with telling us what you think about Finland's border fence. And remember to subscribe to The Military Show for more video commentary covering what European countries are doing to prepare for Russia.